and welcome to this Avid Reader event, which is coming to you live, at least partially, from the plague capital of Melbourne and the People's Free Republic of the Blue Mountains, where Tegan is.
Darug and Gundungurra country.
Pleased to say that geography has been revealed as a purely state of mind and matter of internet connection. So I'm delighted this evening to be talking to Tegan Bennett Daylight, the writer with the name of a highway person and a pen and mind sharp enough to match. I'm going to read you her biography, actually, from the back of the book that we carefully put together. Tegan Bennett Daylight is a writer, teacher, and critic. Her books include the Stellar Award shortlisted Six Bedrooms and the novel Safety in Bombora. As we've said, she lives in the Blue Mountains with her husband and two children, who are all, oh, you're allowed to leave, so they may not be with you, see. We're here to discuss her new book, The Details on Love, Death and Reading, which surely just about covers it. Tegan, welcome.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks, Chrissy. It's lovely to be in Brisbane.
Yes.
Sometimes since I was in Brisbane, but I've got very close ties with the place. My father-in-law and his family live just around the corner from the bookshop. So it is nice to be with you all, wherever you are. But I'm pretending I'm in Brisbane, except for the scarf.
So Tegan, let's start at the beginning. Tell us what it means, this title.
The Details comes from about 25 years worth of teaching and discovering that my students had this, teaching creative writing, that is, that my students had this idea that they couldn't write creative writing, they couldn't write fiction unless they'd had a really fascinating life. So they were all kind of quarrying their lives for trauma to see if they could have stories that could be told that hadn't been told before. And after about 10, 15 years of teaching, I started to say to them, all the stories have been told. The only thing that belongs to you is the detail of your life. That's the only thing that makes you unique. So that was something that I was sort of gathering in my head as I was writing essays. I also began to notice that one of my favourite writers, James Wood, the British critic, was talking about detail a lot in his work as well, the way he read books. So I became quite fascinated with that. And then my mother died, and after she died, I realised that my own eye for detail had been formed by hers. She was a painter, but she was also a really deep reader and just a close observer of things. So all of those ideas had been kind of slowly gathering. This is a sort of coming together of really about 20 years of thinking.
In the what appears in the book is the second chapter called Vagina, which was first published in, or was it first published in the Best Australian Essays?
Yeah, Geordie Williamson published it first in Best Australian Essays, yeah.
And it had quite an impact. And it starts with the idea that every 10 years or so, a book comes along that presents new horizons and readers think this now can be said and writers think this now can be written, a new way of describing our experience. Specifically in that chapter, you go on to discuss some of the details of women's lives that are neglected in literature.
Yeah.
To wit, the vagina.
To wit, the vagina. And
tell us
for bringing it up.
Tell us a bit more about that section of the book.
I'm always really happy to be asked about this one. Of course, I'm happy to ask about any part of it, but Vagina is an essay I'm really proud of. It, again, was the result of about kind of 15 years of experience, this one. 15 years of experience with my vagina, of having two children through it, and having various troubles befall it. One of the things that I realised, I had a partial bladder prolapse, and I really discovered that nobody I knew, except for one or two women, were really talking about this kind of thing. So I felt as though there was nothing in the literature, there was no open conversation about this stuff. But when you do have trouble with your vagina, as with any intimate part of your body, you can't get away from it. The detail, as I say at the end of the essay, the detail is all there is. So when you are troubled by something like a prolapse, it's really present. It's not painful, but it's really present. And I couldn't believe that something so present was never, ever, ever being discussed. So I was gradually sort of accumulating my thinking about this as time went on, and I was lucky enough to find a fantastic obstetrician and gynecologist who did surgery on me, and everything went really well. So I think once everything started to go well, I felt capable of telling the story. Very nice to have my darling friend Charlotte Wood here today, because she was there when I wrote the essay. We were away on a writing retreat with our friends Lucinda Holforth and Vicky Hastrich, and I would go down into my room and write, and then I would come back up and read bits to Charlotte, Vicky and Lucinda. Yeah, see what Charlotte's doing. So they were the first to hear this story that had to be told. And one of the other things, the reason that I relate it to literature is I just realised it never appeared in literature. One of the things that I noticed, I'm a close reader of Jane Austen, and if you read her letters, she talks occasionally about her sisters-in-law. She, of course, didn't have babies herself, but her sisters-in-law and other women she knew were having 13 or 14 children. And she described one of her sisters-in-law as a poor animal after yet another lying in. And Austen, as a single woman, was often called upon to go and look after these women afterwards. But I'm pretty sure nobody was diagnosing their prolapsed bladder, nobody was talking to them about it, nobody was helping them with surgery, and nobody was giving them recovery periods and all of that sort of thing. And I thought, my God, all this literature, and nobody ever says anything about it. The other writer, sorry, this is a big subject for me, but the other writer who I was reading at the time was Carl Ove Knausgaard, and his writing did that kind of head explosion thing for me. I was like, oh my God, we can do this. Okay, we can write about everything. We'll just record everything. But of course, I started to think, if a woman did that, would we have the same response to it? I bet you Carl Uve's on the Nobel Prize, in waiting list. I think there's 125 winners of the Nobel Prize, and I think there's about 16 women. Just noting that. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, wow, we get to talk about penises a fair bit, but we don't really see vaginas. And I don't mean that men shouldn't talk about their penises. Actually, you don't read a lot about prostate cancer unless you're reading Philip Roth, I guess. But yeah, it was time. It was time to write about it. Thank you.
And one of the things about noticing is once you've noticed, you notice the presence or absence.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Everywhere you look.
Yeah.
Do you have I know this is an unfair question, and it may not be the last one this evening, Tegan. Do you have any sense of what the next set of noticing might involve? I mean, it may take a great genius to reveal this to us, of course, but what are the other absences you
do you mean absences in literature as in ways of writing it, or subject matter?
Do you have a sense of the next thing that somebody needs to reveal can be done
in writing? Well, I would say probably the latest, most kind of effective innovation I've seen on the page is probably Maggie Nelson and maybe Jenny Offal as well, what they're doing to the word on the page. Some would say, I can't remember her last name, Lucy, who wrote Ducks Newburyport.
Oh, yes.
That sort of intervention in the words. But one thing that surprises me in literature is I keep thinking I've seen everything. So I think I haven't actually seen what's happening next. But I would say Maggie Nelson is going to have quite a big effect. I'm already seeing younger writers start to... Maggie Nelson is the author of this beautiful book, The Argonauts, and she uses her gutters, her columns, to add comments. And each paragraph is often a meditation on a theorist as well as a bit of sort of autofiction. So I think she's having a big influence, and I'm seeing that in younger writers at the moment. But what's next? I don't know.
Well, that's the beauty of being a reader, isn't it? You don't know necessarily
what do you think? You're at the cutting edge.
I'm asking the questions this evening. But I want everybody to be using their chat function and their buy button and their
Yeah, if you've got a thought, I want to know.
We will probably not the last one.
Oh, I know. I did have a lovely student write something using Instagram. And that was very sweet. I'm not sure if that's the new direction. But
afterwards, you can send me their name.
Yeah.
One of the recurrent themes, indeed the death, or one of the deaths anyway, in the subtitle is of your mother, as you mentioned, and you write very beautifully about that. How did your mother influence you as a reader, first off?
She was a huge reader herself, and she was an endless communicator as well. So she wasn't able to just read and shut up about it. She was a bit like me. She had to tell you about it. And much of her life was spent poised at the end of my bed, waiting to tell me what to read next. And literally like this, how about this one? How about this one? And if I told her that I was bored, she used to do this lovely trawl around the house. We had lots and lots of bookshelves. My parents were both big readers. And she'd come back with a big pile of books and she'd go through them and she'd say, you could read this because it does this, and you like this, you could read this. So she was a huge influence in that sense, and she bought books for us every birthday. We always got a pile of books, as well as other presents. And she was also a huge influence she had a very sharp eye for things. She was a great noticer of things. And again, because she was not just a noticer, she was a communicator. She talked constantly. She was a big talker. So she was always telling me about things. And a lot of my memories are kind of augmented by her kind of talking them back at me, if you know what I mean.
And the chapters that deal with her death are core details 1 and 2. How does the idea of details relate to her death?
To her death? Well, again, the middle essay, Detail 2, which really just details the night of her death. And there's a bit of a recurring theme here. Charlotte and I were away. We'd both been shortlisted for the Stella in the same year. It was a very good year. Charlotte won that year. It was fabulous. But we went away together to the wonderful retreat that they provide for you. And I wrote that essay with her there. And it, again, just like the Vagina essay, I just got to the point where I was so full of the story that I had to tell it. And anybody who's lost anybody, or anybody who's given birth, or anybody who's gone through a large experience, you know that the experience is not done with until you've told it, and in some way or another. So I guess my way of telling is writing. And the detail of what happens when somebody dies, probably most of us here have experienced that, have watched it, have sat with somebody who's died. And it's again not always something that I see recorded in fiction or non-fiction. So I wanted to get some of that stuff down. I'm just starting to get responses from my family. I just got a text from my brother actually just before I came on.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a little bit scary because that's intimate to them, obviously, but their response has been really nice so far.
And actually, you have this lovely line there. When I read, I'm still in conversation with her. All that detail sings in the air, living still. So in a sense, it's also the details that live on, isn't it?
Yeah. And the conversation about books. There were books that she tried to get me to read. She tried to get me to read Moby Dick about 50 times, and I wouldn't read it. Because I just couldn't. It was too damn hard.
And you can't do everything your parents want you to do.
Yeah, exactly. I was a very good girl in a lot of ways.
So I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of the details, and see how far we take it. You do at some point, I'm sorry, I've forgotten exactly where, say that you read Jane Austen, who you mentioned before, not for what she writes about, but how she writes about it.
Mm.
The suggestion is that you don't go to writers for sort of life lessons or world views. So I wonder whether you disagree with Alain de Botton that Proust can change your life. But do you think that's because we don't do that because the big themes are sort of exhausted and covered? Or is it because it's the small things, the details, that are the things that change your life?
I think it's really just about the way that I read. So I'm much more interested in sentences than I am in plots. And it doesn't mean that I don't learn things or come out of books kind of materially, emotionally changed or intellectually changed. I definitely do. And just little note about Proust. The thing about Proust that happened for me when I read him was like, oh my God, it's so experimental. I didn't realize how richly new it was and still is. And so it changed my life because of that. Not because, you know, he sat in bed all day having a tisane.
Well, it contained the Madeleine is the most famous detail in literature.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I definitely think that, I guess that one of the books that I bring up a lot in the details is My Family and Other Animals. I bring that up because I love it so much, and because for years and years and years I've been saying to my students, now you have to tell me what your favourite book is. It's a way of introducing them to each other, and they hate it and they love it. Oh, don't make me choose, you know. And I realised after a while that I'd failed to choose myself, so I thought I better choose one. And My Family and Other Animals is so rich in detail. It's like food, you know, it's like eating. There's something so deep and rich and intimate about the detail in it. And I mean, the story is they go to Corfu and they spend about 3 or 4 years there, and then they go home. But the detail, oh my.
Do you think, I'm sorry if this is a bit abstract, but do you think it has a moral quality, the detail? Well, the reason I asked that is because when I was thinking about this session, I was thinking it's all very well to say the right words are important and evoking the experience of a specific thing is important, but getting the details right is important. But how does that make any sort of statement about getting the ideas right, or you know, how does it? Can it tell us anything about the moral universe of the book that we're reading?
I think it's a really great question. There's something that happens when you write. When you write, whether you're writing fiction or non-fiction, what you really are trying to represent is experiences you've had. Even though you're writing other characters, you're really kind of trying to represent certain feelings and experiences that you've had through your characters. And the better you get at it and the harder you work at it, the more often you get this amazing feeling where the words seem to slot in around the experience. It's like, I've got it right. I've exactly got it right. So it's about the choice of the word, but it's also about the balance and the pivot of the words in the sentence. And I don't know how many other people experience this, but I experience a kind of new rightness about my own feelings about an experience once I've got the words right. Probably the best example I can give is in my last book, In 6 Bedrooms. I wrote out a dream, and, you know, write a dream, lose a reader, whatever. But I got the dream right. I got the dream right. It was a dream about being a room infested by spirits. Once I'd got it described, I never had the dream again because I was absolutely sorted. So I think I write in order to get absolutely sorted about my experience. And to answer your question, does that have a moral quality? It does for me, because it makes me realize the truth of something and accept the truth of something once I've got the words framed correctly around it.
Thank you. I was also struck when I was reading your book and thinking about this, that often an inauthentic experience is inauthentic in the details. A kind of a bad idea actually reveals itself by not corresponding with your felt experience of life.
Yeah, yeah.
So I want to talk to you a bit about being a reader too, because there are a lot of people who might feel they're professional writers, but there's nobody I know actually for whom professional reader is such an apt label.
Yeah.
You.
It is my job. Yeah.
And from your writing too, you get this, and from this book, you get the sense of your reading being active, an active activity. In the same way that you might go for a walk or talk
Yeah.
to somebody. You're a reader all the time, actually, whether you've got a book in front of you or not. And it gives your criticism a distinctive quality. I wonder if you would, do you characterize your critical practice, the way you engage with a text, in any specific way?
Yeah, yeah. These are great questions, Ben. Thank you.
This is your first gig, you see. You'll be answered them 20 times and they'll be very bored.
It's lovely. It's lovely to be asked such good questions. It's a really active process reading for me. You're exactly right. And it always has been. I've always felt somehow weirdly alive in books. Not sort of something precious and whimsical as though I'm dancing through a book or anything, but I don't think I'm there. I'm not kidding myself that I'm in a book, but I do seem to do it very actively with the body. And I have always had a bit of a problem with it as well. And this is sort of just a kind of, I'm a bit porous with books. So I do have the tendency to be a bit colonized by certain books. And it's taken me a lot of time to figure out how to keep the boundaries between myself and books. So when I was quite young, there were a few books that just took me over. One of them was The Secret Garden. So I forced neighbours' children to rehearse scenes from The Secret Garden over and over and over and over. I had all the words in my head and I just couldn't leave it alone. There's something really important about that book to me. The Catcher in the Rye was another that did that to me. I spoke, you can think I had many, many friends at high school. I spoke like Holden Caulfield for some time. So, you know, that went down well. And great times. There are a few other books. Stalky and Co., the Rudyard Kipling book. I spoke like those 1899 schoolboys, so that also went down well. I did not seem to be able to put up a kind of barrier between me and books, and it is still something of a problem for me when I'm not feeling mentally that great. I have to be careful what books I read. I think everybody shares that to a degree. But it took me a long time to be able to translate that into words. I just thought I had this weird, useless skill, and I didn't even think it was a skill. I just had this weird, useless relationship that I was just sort of carrying around with me. Just interestingly, I've got a daughter who's 18, and the other day she sat down and she wrote down lines from films. She has a photographic memory. It's really unusual. And when she was very little and she watched movies, she used to say all the words. All she needed to do was watch them once and she could say all the words. This got her through HSC English because she could memorize huge bits of Shakespeare. So she sat down, she just started writing out quotes from movies that she loves. And then later she said to me, what's the use of this? What am I going to do with this thing? I don't know anybody else who can do this, but what's it for? And I said, we just don't know yet, but it will be good. It will be good. So it took me 15 or 20 years to translate that into something useful.
And one of the very striking things about it is the sort of convention of literary criticism is often that it's austere and sort of, you know, don't even refer to yourself, let alone describe yourself.
Yeah,
That's not how you write about it.
No. And I take my cue from, I mean, the person who woke me up, I mean, I always loved reading the London Review of Books and the New York Review of Books were two really important journals too when I was young. But it was through the London Review of Books that I found James Wood. And he has been one of those writers for me. We've all got a few writers who are writing to us. I'm sure all of you have got somebody who's writing to you. And James Wood, he doesn't know it, but he's writing to me. And what I love about his work is this mixture of total authority and complete helplessness before the text. He's totally in control of what he does, and yet he loves literature with his whole body. It doesn't matter that he's, you know, a very sweet-natured, slightly anxious-looking Englishman. He is living, you know, in that criticism. He taught me to hang on to the intellect while allowing the body to surrender to the work. So there are a few other critics who write close to him. Virginia Woolf is definitely one of them. She's only limited by her time. If she was writing now, she would be as important to me as James Wood is.
That's what I wanted to ask you next, actually. And I've got one or two more questions for you, and then maybe in 5 minutes we'll invite others
to the room.
Ask some questions. That's right. Throw to the many rooms across the nation. And it is this point about having a sustained relationship with a writer. At one point in the book, you talk about the fact that there are, is it maybe 8 or 10 or 12 writers whose every work even every word, I think, you've read. Yeah. One of whom is Jane Austen, we've mentioned. But it must be very different with a living writer, where the kind of horizon keeps, well, not quite that as work, does it? But anyway, you don't know how great the work is, you don't quite know where it's going. James Wood was one we were going to raise, actually, but is there another writer that you'd like to talk about in the context of that relationship, of how their writing has changed and maybe how your response to it has changed?
Yeah, and you bring up a really interesting thing that with living writers, it's a different thing, because they're writing in your lifetime. You're watching them do their thing, and for me, those writers include Alan Hollinghurst, Kazuo Ishiguro, Charlotte. I've watched Charlotte read and write for years and years. I've been working alongside her, but also reading her really closely. Tim Winton, Helen Garner, David Malouf. And what's especially interesting is when Helen was the most profound influence on me when I first started trying to piece together a novel when I was in my late teens, early 20s. I used to write with all of her early fiction literally open on the desk around me, and I just kind of if I paused, I would sort of take a drink from her work and then try to come back to the page. And that ongoing relationship with her work, it's changed over time. And, of course, she's kept on writing and I've kept on reading. It was that really early engagement with things like, my favourite for a long time was Honor and Other People's Children, but obviously Monkey Grip was hugely important. The Children's Bark was hugely important to me. And I loved Cosmo Cosmolino as well. So those were the really hugely influential things. But I've watched her develop, change, alter, change tack, do all the magnificent things that Helen does. It's a really, really lively relationship. And the interesting thing is, with Helen, as with Charlotte and one or two of the others, it's a good friendship as well. And Helen has very bravely borne me kind of going on and on and on about how great she is. I just got a very lovely email from her.
You're not the only one she's experienced this from.
Yeah, she's been really gracious about it, because it's odd. And I said to her in the email that I wrote back, I said, this intimacy that I formed with your work, it's not your responsibility. You don't have to take charge of it in any way. You don't have to worry about it. She understands that because she's a writer and she has writers to whom she's writing. She gets that there's something different about the relationship in person and the relationship with. But once you have that intimate relationship with another writer, you just never lose it, and you form a friendship with them that may or may not happen in real life. But it means that when you watch them write anything new, all of those writers that I've just mentioned, if they have anything new to write, I'm reading it, and I'm reading it with the utmost sympathy and empathy. I think it's their best work is not important. I understand what their project is because I've been reading them so closely for so long. Alice Munro is another of those. She won't write any more books, but she's somebody else.
And that's what I was going to ask you, actually, about the nature of the relationship, and possibly some of the people listening can relate to it. Is it like, do you find it's like any sort of long relationship where there'll be times where you'll read a book and you'll think, oh, that's nonsense. Yeah. Stop talking like that, and, behave yourself, and or whatever it is one feels sometimes in long relationships. Not about Charlotte, of course, but other people. So there's a tolerance built in Sometimes
it's better than tolerance, though, because it's an understanding of their project. So it's not, we're all snooty occasionally about other writers' work, but when you've got an intimate relationship like that with a writer, and again, whether it's in person or just on the page, you can't be snooty about what they do because you understand what they're trying to do. And whether or not they're wholly successful every time is not the point. And what you understand also, if you're a writer and you've got other friends who are writers, is they feel the same way about you. They might love you, but not, adore everything that you write. There's this understanding between us that we don't have to be super fans of each other or each other's work, but we are close readers and appreciators of each other's project. And it's such a valuable, just a fantastic gift, actually.
Well, you're lucky to have that. May I ask you, I think probably what will be one final question before we invite others to do the same. You're a teacher as well as a writer, and I'm not misremembering you saying, in fact, teaching is emerged as a sort of second vocation for you. In another celebrated essay, In the Details, The Difficulty is the Point, that's the name of the essay, you talk about some of the challenges of teaching at university students. But at this time when the humanities are, I wish I could find a different word than under attack from the federal government, I wondered whether you might share your view about the importance of teaching literature to university students.
Yeah, well, wind me up and set me going.
Well, I'm sorry to have done that with only maybe 2 minutes.
Okay, so one of the things I want to say is it feels to me like this change in policy about how much arts degrees will cost is the first really open gesture, sally, something in a culture war which the Morrison government have been quietly building for some time. And COVID seems to me to be the perfect smokescreen for them to begin manoeuvres. So there's that. I think I work closely with people who are in all sorts of communicating professions, publishers, teachers, lawyers, other writers, artists, performers, arts administrators, and journalists. And I know from working with these people that literacy is a dying art or a dying skill. It's not even an art, it's a skill. I'm seeing it die at university. I'm seeing students who are less and less literate, less and less able to express themselves well. And I know that this is a hugely valuable skill to take out into a really devastated workplace. That somebody who can express themselves clearly in person and on the page is a really, really valuable person. And every so often, Russell and I have been anxious for our kids because our kids are arts types and they're big readers. They write a nice sentence. And every so often we think, oh my God, are we doing something wrong? Because this doesn't seem to be the right atmosphere to bring up this child in. Maybe we should be teaching them to do other things as well. But that's their skill. And it is devastating on a personal level. My daughter's doing an arts degree right now to see that undervalued. But if anybody in government could come into a university with me and see what I've seen over 25 years of teaching, which is as funding goes down for universities, universities become businesses, students become customers. The way to keep customers is to make them happy. The way to make them happy is to make it very easy to get into the university and very difficult to fail at a degree. So you end up passing students whose written work is not up to the job. So universities get worse and worse and we become a stupider place to be. And the way you also save money is you lay off academics and you make it very difficult for them to pursue their research and you keep them at this teaching sort of thing. You make the classes shorter and you fill them with more students. So students get less of your time. You make semesters shorter. You lay off wonderfully capable administrative staff who make students' lives easier and academics' lives easier. You make academics do all of the preparatory work for a class. So I work at a lovely university at the moment, but nonetheless, nobody is paying me to move from face-to-face delivery to online. I'm just figuring that out. They're helping, but I'm not getting paid to do it. So by openly attacking the arts and just as openly attacking university, we reduce literacy in Australia. And every time we do these tests and we discover that our kids are not as literate as they should be, teachers get in trouble and universities get in trouble. And it's just, I've just watched it. I've watched it happen. 25 years of teaching, and I've watched this happen, and it's got worse and worse and worse and worse. And my students are delightful. We're a lovely generation of kids. They get kinder and more generous and more open to each other. 25 years ago, they were all in it for themselves. These days, they're supportive, lovely kids who deserve our care. Nonetheless, many of them change tense 3 times in a sentence. They're not even aware they're doing it. Not all of them. I can see you nodding, Josephine. You must be an academic. You've seen this. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting. Anyway, thank you for asking.
Well, no, not anyway. I mean, it's a vital subject, and but perhaps the subject of a whole other conversation. Another time. Chrissy, am I doing the right thing if I sort of invite you to?
Yes, you are.
Deal with any questions?
Yeah, I have some questions. So I will go straight to the first one. We talked about Charlotte Wood a bit tonight, and she is getting her own back by asking a question now. So you have such a full life with kids and work, an extended family and teaching and people. So when and how do you get to read so much? Can you tell us about how you make space in your life for the rich, quiet, and that such a lot of reading needs?
Yeah. Thank you, Charlotte. I don't have any social media. And I don't have any social media not because I'm morally opposed to it, but because I'm so thin-skinned that if somebody said something mean about me, I just couldn't handle it. I'd always feel left out, or, it's not a good space for me to be in. So I don't have constant stuff coming up on my phone. So I have nothing to check except email and text, and that's enough for me. So instead of picking up my phone in an idle moment, I always pick up a book. So the house is covered in books that are open. So every time I've got a little breathing space, I'm reading at the moment this gigantic biography of Lawrence Durrell, and there's no way, I couldn't read it in bed, it would brain me if I dropped it. So I've just got it open in the living room, and every time I sit down, I read it. I do what everybody does and read at night. And if you took your phone out of the equation and you took your emails and your texts out of the equation, everybody would have time. That's what I'm saying to my students all the time. The idea of they think they're so busy, it's a total illusion. They're not busy, they're just checking. So all of that time that one might normally be checking their phone or consuming media of some kind, I'm reading, and I'm not reading with intent. I'm just reading because it sort of gives my mind a little bit of play. Yeah.
That's great. That's a fantastic way to do it. I'd love to get rid of my social media. And I'm also glad
you can.
I can. I'm also glad I didn't tag Tegan Bennett in my tweet.
Well, you're very welcome to. I mean, have at it. I
don't know who she is, but anyway. So Nita Lorimer has asked, you have a comment. The experience is not done with until it's told. I find that very interesting, as there is also the thought, expressed best by a character in Moomintroll, another book that I love, that by telling about an experience, you lose the real memory. And the only thing one remembers is the story one has told, rather than the reality.
Yeah.
These two thoughts, can they be combined?
I think it's just horses for courses, to be honest. I think it's become very clear to me, but that I lay down memory by making words out of it. That's actually how I do it. And in fact, sometimes when there are memories that I don't want, I'm better off sort of scouring away the words from around it, because then it won't kind of stay with me quite so solidly. I definitely have unspoken memories that I sort of carry around and stick in fiction occasionally in little bits and pieces. But yeah, I find that for me, memory is it begins with smell or sight, but it's made of words.
There's a question here from Bronwyn Levy. Tegan, you've mentioned not being able to put up a barrier between yourself and some books. Do you think your mother also couldn't put up a barrier?
I don't know, actually. Didn't ever ask her about that. So the funny thing about this book is it articulates a lot of things we didn't actually say to each other, even though we spent such a long time talking. We didn't really talk about our relationship to each other that much. So I'm not totally sure. What I do know, though, is that she thought in books. So she often used to, if she saw something, she would point it out. There's a moment in the first essay where I say when we used to drive over the Gladesville Bridge at night, she would point to the lights cascading over the bridge, and she would quote Hart Crane's poem, The Bridge, in which he calls the movement of headlights over a bridge the immaculate sigh of stars.
Oh, it's
I
beautiful.
do know that she used her reading kind of inhabited her in the same way. It was as though sometimes she needed the words of others to express herself, to describe experience. So I'm guessing she probably was colonized. Actually, you know what? There was a thing that she told me. It's kind of close to it. When she was a young woman, she was absolutely obsessed with Laurence Olivier. So she was born in 1941. So I guess, I don't exactly know when he was born, but maybe he was 20 years old now or something. And being my mum, the thing she was particularly obsessed with was Richard III. So he just doesn't look that good in that one, but she loved him anyway. I think he was on Hamlet as well, but really into him. And she talked about once going to the local library, it must have been Drummoyne Library or something like that, and finding a book about Laurence Olivier and picking it up. And she said to me, I literally had to sit on the floor very quickly because I was so overwhelmed. Now that's obviously got to do with star power, but it does happen. It did happen with the book with her. She just suddenly couldn't stand up straight anymore because Olivier and the book were in front of her. So yeah, I'd say she was probably pretty vulnerable to the text like me.
That's wonderful. Such a great story. Look, I think that you are probably going to have a similar effect on a lot of your readers. And there's a lot of people here today who are big readers who have listened to our conversation today and who are, I think, stimulated to go off and pull things out of their bookshelf after this conversation. It's been absolutely fascinating. And it's been really fantastic to hear the two of you speak together. Ben, that was a really, really interesting questions and such
great.
fascinating answers. Really great. This has been amazing. I'm so glad that I was actually here to hear it. And
we've had fun working together. It's been good.
I'll bet you have. I actually wouldn't mind just quickly hearing if there was, if your working relationship was as equally stimulating as this conversation has been.
Yeah, we've had a lot of long conversations, and a lot of them have been about books. That's why we're in the business. And that's actually Tim Winton said that to me when my work first got picked up by Ben. He said, he's a lover of books. That's who you want.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. It's fantastic. Thank you so much to the both of you.
Thanks, Chrissy, and thanks, Ben. Bless you.
Pleasure.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for having
everyone.
us. Thanks for joining us.
So nice to see all of you.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute people. So I'm allowing people to unmute themselves. If you feel like unmuting yourself and just joining me in a round of applause, if anyone can reach their computer to unmute it and to clap. So congratulations. Thank you for your book, Tegan. Thank you for the conversation.
Congratulations. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming, guys. There's so many of you. It's lovely. Lovely.
Lovely. Thanks.
Thanks,
See you all
Chrissy.
later. We'll see you
Take
later.
it easy.
Bye.
Love ya. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.